setting the stage. For the purpose of setting the stage for the rise of neuromarketing and neurosciences research techniques, I'll first have to paint a generic picture about marketing in the consumer market. Now, this message may very well be old news for some of you not. It represents the tension that the field of marketing is dealing with on a daily basis. Namely, we've got marketing that tries to understand consumer thinking in order to influence their decision making. So when consumers get to the point of purchase, they will then be making the right choices, and that is, of course, the right choices for the company, for your own company, probably. Yet, experience learns that conversion is not that predictable, because in fact, it doesn't always. It's not a one-on-one where marketeers try to influence consumer thinking. Consumer goes to the store and purchases exactly what they've been trying to influence you around. In fact, quite often consumers come home with different items. So what is in fact happening? It could be that consumers are just funny creatures and they do as they like. Or we can argue that for a long time, the industry has worked under certain assumptions that are in fact incomplete. Let's look at assumption number one. So for a long time, explicit research such as surveys, interviews, focus groups have long been the norm in the consumer research industry and quite often still are. But there are limits to explicit research techniques. Let's just go through them quickly. So while we're talking about surveys, interviews, and focus groups, we found, or the industry has found, that participants, they vary in their motivation to be honest or to comply. People might not feel like it, or they might not like the interviewer, or they don't think it's necessary to come clean all the way about their behavior. Second reason could be that the tools that are being used are suboptimal for full expression. If you've got surveys with tick the boxes and so many answers or scales, you might feel, as I've felt myself quite often, that the exact answer or how you want to respond is just not part of the tick the boxes, and you get frustrated because it doesn't really express what you want to say, and then they tell you to choose anyway. A third one is an inability to articulate feelings. So this is quite common to many people. You might not have the wordings to express how you feel or how to nuance the subtleties of your thinking, of your feeling. And if it doesn't come through, that might just make the difference to the marketeer, but they haven't caught it. Number 4 would be the awareness of your own drivers and feelings. People may simply not always know why they do what they do. Some people have better natural talent for introspection, but even the greatest talents, turns out that we as humans are not always aware. I mean, we might think that we know why we do what we do and still don't know it. And the last one is the difficulty to recall routine activities. In our everyday routines and habits, things that, like driving even, we do it on an automatic pilot. So if someone comes and asks you to recall all these activities in detail, you simply forget half of them because you don't think of them, you just do them. So just one example of this, which comes from one of our own studies that we did for a client in the facial care industry. This was a large observational study, and it turned out also with self-report combined with it. We found that although they described what they described in self-report accurately, it was just not the full routine. In fact, having looked at the observational data and comparing it to self-report, it turned out that participants in this study only accounted for their actual routine in 25 to 40% 45% of the cases. This shows how much you might miss out in self-report methods. So that brings us to the second assumption that might not be completely true or incomplete. And that is the assumption that for a long time, consumers have considered, consumers were considered to be rational, calculating human beings in their purchase process. Now, the rise of behavioral economists, with Daniel Kahneman in the lead, I would say, and I think most people would know them from his book, Thinking Fast, Slow. He has been changing this way of thinking. He states, in fact, that the influence of emotion, intuition, and the subconscious in consumer decision-making is far greater than one would imagine. In this context, I would like to give the more generic statement of Damasio, who's a neuroscientist and writer of the book Descartes' Error, stated, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are in fact feeling machines that think." So that's turning it around. That actually tells us that, well, we don't think first and then feel, it's just the other way around. So you need to approach the whole research in a different manner. That brings me to neuroscience research, the overview, so to speak. Neurosciences research is in fact implicit research, and implicit research, as opposed to explicit research, is assessing behavior without direct asking. Now, I'd like to talk about it as the part where you measure and research behavior that is invisible, as opposed to behavior that is visible and observable. So where on the one hand, we've changed in, we're going to be changing in techniques. On the other hand, so the thinking of the consumer has changed, so we need to also dive more into the inner world and the emotion. Now, and with this picture, I show you that it might even fit more than you'd be thinking of. I'm pretty sure that most of you would be thinking of the type of research that fits the left picture, namely the brain and all the nerves that are part of the nervous system, physiology, as opposed to observational studies. I'd like to dive into that first and tell you a little bit more about the behavioral neuroscience part. It is the less known brother of the physiological methods within neuroscience. Behavioral neuroscience works from the understanding behavior is linked to our biology and our evolution, and by studying it into detail, you will be learning about the biological processes. And I think that you might not realize it, but I think we're all familiar with how body language reveals, for example, when men and women are undeniably attracted to one another and want to get each other's attention. There's the, as I'm told, there's the throwing with hair and the men who are puffing up their upper body to look bigger, etc. So there are just all kinds of little details that people do. They're not aware of it, and they get these signs from each other. And it's not always that conscious. Or, for example, when you're eating something that you really enjoy, then the best of upbringing will not be able to prevent you taking bigger bites and eating faster than you would otherwise do. So these are examples of how behavior can tell something about you and you don't even have to report about it. I want to stress, though, that although many people think of observational studies and thinking of ethnography, this is not what I'm referring to. Ethnography is a qualitative research technique that is most often used for inspiration and ideation, and a lot of personal interpretation from the researcher. What I'm talking about is a discipline where behavior is cut up in micro parts, for example, such as gaze behavior, mouth behavior, hand behavior, postures, limb behavior, etc. And that behavior is then turned into quantitative data. just to give you a little bit of an impression of how that would happen, depending on the type of question that someone might have, you create behavior groups. And then within behavior group, you determine what is part of that behavior group. So let's say it's all about the hand, then the hand goes all kinds of directions. So maybe you do something with the fingers, and then you might add relevant parameters. Let's say the hand does something with a tool, then you might, let's say we're in the kitchen, and you want to know what kind of tool it is, that would be a parameter. And then when you've defined all that, you collect videotaped behaviors, so the behavior on videotape, and then you make sure each behavior is given a start and a stop. So that, graphically, that would look something like this. So with the starting and stopping of behavior, then what in essence is qualitative data, namely behavior, will then turn into quantitative data. In the below the picture, you see reading, drinking, stirring, chopping with all these color-coded chunks. So with that, which is in essence numerical data, you can run statistical analysis. So what can we do with it, you might think? Now, I will not go through all of them, and I can't tell you names of what companies we've done this for. But just to give you an example, in the lower part, the left lower part, there's, for example, a picture of a girl drinking, and behavioral analysis in that case found differences in drinking behavior between product A versus product B. And in developing specific product properties, this can be important. Let's say one type of product promotes more sips or bigger sips than the other one. Now, the girl eating, in this case, a dairy product, there was a children's study, revealed that the number of bites and bite sizes could reveal the preference for a certain product without having to ask them. And then in the top quadrant, that was a study that revealed that the unpacking experience of a food product, a food concept, impacted the overall satisfaction of the product more than its sensory attributes. Now that can, for example, fuel different food and packaging concepts for further development. Which makes me want to move on, and I have moved on to a specific element in behavioral research, which is facial expression. Now, facial expression is, in fact, or the analysis of it is, in fact, something that we do on a daily basis. Everyone does it. We assess each other. We assess each other's moods, feelings, state of mind by reading the face. What facial expression analysis does, or the software, is actually nothing else than doing it automatically. It does so based on the FACS system of Paul Ekman, which stands for Facial Activation Coding System. And the software would spit out the basic emotions that he has defined, but also gives out values around valence and the intensity of the emotional expression. And such software has modules that does also analyze each individual action unit. And an action unit, I don't want to go into too deeply, but that are all the muscle groups and points in the face that actually can, in combination, make up an emotion. So what can we do with that? Facial expression can be supportive in a whole range of studies where you evaluate different stimuli. Those can be food products, they can be fragrances, they can be the use of a product, and of course communication executions. Or, for example, when we zoom into communication executions, it could help you evaluate specific episodes in the execution. Let's say, the creative agency has done its best to work certain jokes into certain areas, certain episodes in the commercial, and you want to check whether this is actually working out the way you want it to, or you can analyze your communication on the basis of certain communication theories, such as in this case, peak end theory. So the representation here in the slide is a piece out of a communication execution, and below you see a visual representation of how at the very end of the commercial, the line, the green line in this case, which stands for happy, goes up. So in this case, for example, this commercial definitely does end on a happy note. So these are just examples of what you could do with it. Which makes me want to move on to moving away from the behavioral part of neurosciences methods to the what you probably all know to be neurosciences methods. Just quickly, how does this? So what do we see? We've got a body, a nervous system, and it. Although most of you would probably think of neurosciences researchers as researching the brain, the brain itself, whereas the whole nervous system also comprises of the peripheral nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord together are the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves branching out, connecting all other parts of the body. When you split that out again, please. You've got, on the one hand, an autonomous nervous system that reaches out to all the internal organs, that drives all the, the functioning of the internal organs. It's mostly, so I'm saying mostly, because I want to keep it simple, it's an unconscious involuntary system, and it has a part that actually puts you in fight-flight mode, and it has a part that makes sure your body goes back to rest again. And the peripheral nervous system has the other part that is the somatic nervous system, and this consists of all the nerves going to your skeletal muscle movement system, and we are much more talking about the voluntary conscious system there. And that last thing didn't work. In this case, doesn't matter. Just move on. Just talking about the central nervous system. Now, mighty fascinating. I think we're all, it's an organ that we're all curious about. In fact, I would say it's the engine of reason, the seat of the soul. Now, that's a whole lot. And therefore, it's not that strange that we all want to learn more about it. Truth of the matter is that amongst the whole gamma of neurosciences methods, directly researching the brain is also the most difficult method. Between MRI and a, title's not really correct, but EEG. Now, the most expensive, most intrusive versus the most affordable and least intrusive means of getting data from your brain. So as you can understand, there's a world of difference between them. We've got MRI on the one hand that measures blood flow, EEG measures electrical signals within the brain. The one on the left side, the MRI, is best known for delivering highest quality of spatial information about the brain. In other words, where activity is taking place. EEG, on the other hand, is known for giving temporal information about the brain. In other words, when activity in time is taking place. They need each other in creating understanding of the exact workings of the brain. So other industries like marketing can apply these theories. Now, you can understand that if we talk about applying these methods in a marketing research setting and using consumers, the MRI is for many, I'd say 99% of the market, not a realistic tool. Very expensive to have, to own, or to have regular access to it, therefore not very realistic for most companies. There are agencies offering services using the MRI studies. And then they are limited to communication studies, and obviously you can understand the setting for consumers is not a very realistic one. They're put in that machine, they have to lie down for quite some time. So turning to EEG, the best bet for now and in the future, but not ideal, because we've got EEG. Missing one. Yeah. No, excuse me, one back. So we've got EEG, and EEG has indeed become increasingly user-friendly. I mean, we started, probably not further than 10 years ago even, that we still had to deal with full EEG caps, about 24 electrodes in a cap on your head, making contact with your scalp skin with gels, wires running to the machinery. So if in consumer research, that would be creating a lot of barriers, and you wouldn't be able to get all the consumers in for research, because I'm thinking of especially women. They would walk out of that facility with the electrode gel in their hair. Not realistically, not an option. Now, a lot has happened over the years. EEG headsets have, in fact, become a lot user-friendly. So from wired caps, they've become wireless, and from wireless caps with many points, you can now find companies that offer research, often headsets that only have a few points, which is the last picture there. Now, unfortunately, where they've gone from wet to dry and from 24 signals to one, they might make it more practical and more user-friendly. That does not yet mean that the output is going to be of the same quality. Now, yes, I would like to for you all to bear that in mind. Now, so even all that may be more accessible, then we get to the data that's coming out of EEG. Now, this is typically what will come out of EEG collection of data. This is the raw EEG data signal. To experiment with this, or to read it and to interpret it, it requires expertise and specialist knowledge. It's not easily interpreted to a market that needs answers and interpretations fast. Now, there are companies that actually that make from these data, that create algorithms that are more easily understandable. But to do so, you would need to first create, for example, make sure a person comes into a certain emotion. And when they're in that emotion, you need a whole sample that you put in this whole sample of people that you will bring in that same emotional state. And then over that data, you can building algorithms. Now, as you can understand, when you see the next picture,
I just want to make, Xandra, we're getting some comments that the sound drops every 2 seconds. We're trying to fix it in between. So I'll keep an eye on the technology, and we'll hope it gets better. I just adjusted some of the settings. So let's move forward to the next slide. Here you go.
Okay. I was just mentioning for those who didn't hear it, that the raw EEG signal is really difficult to interpret, and you need specialists to do so. So the market has demanded, obviously, for easy algorithms that would make it and almost put on a cap, get some data, and know what it means. Now, unfortunately, the biggest desire in the market is to learn about emotions. When you look at this picture, you see that the emotions, which is the circle, the where the circle is around, are mostly organized by the structures in the brain that are lying more deeply. The red area on the surface, that's where most of the cognitive processing is being done. So whereas these algorithms that would from which there would be an easy flow of emotional interpretation is difficult for the emotional processes, it's less difficult for the cognitive processes. So there are companies that actually deliver algorithms that can deal with mental workload and engagement. So they do exist. For the emotional interpretation, that is for many of us still too far away. Which brings me to the next part, which is the peripheral nervous system, visual attention and eye tracking. I suppose we get to more known terrain. It is, of all the neuroscience techniques, eye tracking has been the earliest to make the transition to consumer research. It's the one best known and found most widely dispersed amongst the consumer research world. And within consumer research, it is being used in a whole range of expertise areas. So what you see here is the areas that it's being used in already and the ways you can do it. So we've got on the right-hand side below, you've got a fixed eye tracker attached to a PC, remote it's called, and you've got mobile eye tracking glasses, so you can actually you could virtually go anywhere and follow what people are watching from the one who is obviously wearing the eyeglasses. So what does it do exactly? While we're looking around us, our eyes are jumping back and forth from one point to another. It is what we call an alternation between fixations and saccades. Now, in this picture, you see a visualization of fixations and saccades, and with the dots being the fixations and the lines, the saccades. The eye is only said to be taking in information during the fixations and not during the saccades, during which the eye could be called blind. Now, the bigger the dot, the longer the eye has rested on that spot. Now, you can imagine in doing any kind of communication research, website, navigation research, etc., these gaze plots give you an indication of the elements that draw most attention. Now, when we average these gaze plots over a larger sample, we are talking about heat maps. These are heat maps, give you accumulated presentation of what a larger sample of viewers has looked at, with red being the highest concentration of views. Now, this can give you statistical results, deciding, let's say, on communication execution design A versus B. This could be helpful, especially when linking it to conversion rates, which design does better. If, for example, there are any particular areas that you are interested in, you could define areas of interest. The picture where the baby's sitting down, that would be, let's say, the head of the baby could be defined as an area of interest. In doing so, in typical eye tracking software, you could then later on, after the research, that area, you can harvest all kinds of data of that area, what has happened in that area, and get all kinds of details. Now, although it's the most well-known eye tracking, most used neuromarketing neurosciences tool, we also quite frequently hear that users are disappointed or unsure what to do with it. That's because eye tracking can tell you what they're looking at, maybe how many people are looking at it. However, it cannot tell you why they are doing it. And in finding out why, you'd want to couple it with old-fashioned explicit research or with other implicit techniques. Which brings me to the alternative peripheral nervous system measuring tool, also known as biometrics research. Biometrics research is where it gets to the point where we're going to stick stuff to your hands, arms, and other places. What do they do? Now, I've taken out two that are being mostly used and having most value are heart rate variability and electrodermal activity. In short, these tools give you information about the beating of your heart and the activity of your sweat glands. And both are good indicators of stress and arousal levels. When I zoom into heart rate, every heart beats, but unlike what most people think, the time between each beat is never exactly the same. In fact, your respiration influences your heartbeat, and with breathing in and out, the beat has a longer and a shorter interval. That's a process, in fact, that when you're in a rested and relaxed state, it happens in perfect harmony. However, when one is stressed and not at ease, breathing will become more irregular and the harmony will get disrupted. So when you look at the picture, the bottom picture, it's in the bottom picture, it's the lowest of the two graphs that shows the rested and relaxed state. So the waves are deep, but they're coherent. There's harmony. The top one, the waves are less deep, and there's a more incoherent pattern. So these are ways of saying something about arousal levels. These are pictures of electrodermal activity. What is electrodermal activity? It's also being used, I mean, the term galvanic skin response is also being used here, and it's basically the same. In regardless how we refer to it, we're talking about the ability of the skin to conduct current. When the skin becomes moist, the conductance will improve. This means that when our sweat glands activity goes up, which it does in situations of heightened arousal, the conductance will increase and the electrodermal activity will go up as well. Now, it was found a long time ago that this is a process that we cannot influence that much, and it's part of our fight and flight system, which is a very old and evolutionary system. It does its work without our interference. Now, the above picture, just to give you an idea, gives a representation of two different people listening to the same musical stimulus. So it's just a piece of music. Now, we also had them self-report on how they felt about it. Person A was in fact appalled by the song and going numb soon after, and person B was really touched. Now, needless to say, that is actually represented in the picture. Person B, who was really touched by the song, showed a lot of I would say a lot of electrodermal activity, or I could basically also say a lot of sweat gland activity. So this is a way of getting indications of arousal. Now, which brings me to a picture that I can imagine that this picture, in fact, is something that does not immediately inspire for you to go to work with biometrics yourself. You might feel some barriers in working with your consumer to the extent that you have to get that physical. Now, don't worry, things are getting increasingly more easy. We've got wristbands nowadays that even though the chest is not the only place, I have to say you can measure heart rate indications by using the finger. But even then, the wristbands that we get nowadays are getting better and better. And they're a very easy, user-friendly, and a mobile way of getting data such as heart rate, and sometimes even also in this instance of EDA measures. Now, also when not just in harvesting the data, but also in the processing of the data, it becomes increasingly more friendly. We're changing slides. We're changing slides. And that often means it's a question of uploading and the software there will allow for you to will do the analysis for you, in fact, because with this type of data, such as heart rate, there's a lot of noise in your electrical signal as well, so you need to filter that out. Now, there's a software available that does all that for you. For now, I'm getting to the end of this talk. Now, you've heard me say at several points during the presentation that a specific tool in itself has limited added value. It may be valuable, different than explicit research, but on the other hand, you cannot get subtlety, or you cannot ask anything, and in itself, it does not always have value. You either have to link these implicit data to external data sources or different data sources, such as conversion data, or maybe even start with a hypothesis and then have alternative situation present where you can compare physiological data. But more importantly, I think it is to be aware of the fact that in this type of research, you do good to combine methods, and it's almost the more the merrier, I would say. The more physiological data you or implicit research data you harvest and combine, the better your picture is getting. And ideally, you also couple it with old-fashioned explicit research techniques to give it to help with further interpretation. And I think, would it be? I'm looking at the data now. I can give examples of that. Maybe move it one. This is, for example, a simple two-dimensional model of emotions. I know there's 2- and 3-dimensional models that describe very extensively various different emotions and moods, etc. Now, in some of these theories, valence needs to be coupled with physiological arousals. So you could play around with harvesting data on valence and then combine it with arousal data that comes out of EDA measures or heart rate measures. Now, with that, you can play around to get an even fuller picture of the state of mind, the mood of that someone is in while evaluating your product or placing them in a certain situation. Or moving to our last picture. That one? Oh, maybe the picture. No, the live one.
Do you want to show the live software?
Yes.
Okay. We're now starting up Face Reader. Here it is.
Oh, you can do that.
Oh yeah, we can also show the observer. Or
just run this. So people, Reader. Yeah. This is just for closure, almost to get a live demonstration of how that works. Now, this is just a facial expression analysis when someone is maybe watching a communication outing.
And I will also show the video you were talking about. So it now opens the video.
So in this case, what you can see is a combination of facial expression analysis data combined with eye tracking data. And why is this strong? Because by coupling the emotion to what someone is actually looking at, well, both of them become more stronger, and it gives a really good indication. It's not just a full picture, because even in a full picture, someone could be looking at all kinds of things in a picture, but by their eye tracking data, it becomes more specific what they are looking at. Now, you could even couple this with physiology, and then you would get below, for example, in this case, you see graphs at the bottom, the graphical representation of the facial expressions, but you could also add on data on the physiology, synchronized, as integrated with these tools, and then synchronized in time. So basically everything that I've been talking about today, up until behavior, can all be integrated in one tool, so to speak, where it's all synchronized in time. Then you get a really strong point of what is happening with a person in at a particular point in time, and that's when you can really start making some draw some conclusions. I think for now.
Well, thank you, Xandra.
Yes, I will finish. Thank you all for listening, and I think we're going to be looking at some questions if we had some.
Well, I received some questions, but they were according to the listeners, the audio fell away. So I apologize for that, and we will send you an email with the link where you can view the recording and the presentation. No other questions were asked. So I would say thank you all for attending. Thank you, Xandra, for this interesting talk. And
You're welcome.
We hope to see you again. Thank you for joining.